and what you're up to. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so let me know if you can see that. Yes, we're good. Okay, sweet. So this is how we can heal trauma through yoga. My name is Lisa Danylchuk, and I'm super happy that you're here. I feel like this work is so important. And I want to make sure I'm clear about why. Maybe you're just getting into this yoga and trauma recovery stuff, and you've got a passion for it. I don't know about you, but there's so many traumatic events happening around, just too many to name, honestly. And we're not going to go into a long list of things that are traumatizing because you've got the news for that, right? I just feel like we all need trauma-informed practices that work, ones that can support us when we're going through hard times, ones that we can share with our loved ones in our community when the going gets really tough. And this awareness, trauma-informed awareness, and an embodied approach to healing trauma can prevent harm and help people who have been through such horrific things in life, right? And especially when folks have been through trauma repeatedly at early ages, the more we know this as a collective, the more we can help those folks, right? Rather than going, oh, I'll refer it to someone else, I don't know how to work with it, or rather than people being kind of tucked in the sidelines of society and not getting the help they need. Also want to share a belief here that healing is possible. Okay, I've worked with people who've been through, again, horrific things, exploitation, abuse, and I deeply believe and know that healing from trauma is possible. It's not going to look the same for every person, but what does that mean? That means that experiencing safety after having not experienced safety is an option, right? It's on the table. Also, even if you, people you loved, people you serve, have been through really horrific traumas, experiencing awe, experiencing joy, experiencing play, or just celebrating life is possible. I've seen it happen time and time again. I've seen people go from the depths of struggle and sorrow to feeling calm, feeling centered, and appreciating life. And that also looks very different, right? We're all unique beings, and I want to honor that. Also, just want to honor this arc and say, it's possible. I believe it. And on the days you don't believe it, I hope you have a community like I do, like each of you here. I hope you have folks you can connect with to remind you that healing is possible. So I'm here and I do this work because honestly, I've been trained in trauma since I was really young. My mom was a psychologist. I used to go to conferences with her. I have an eye for it. I just see it everywhere. Even when folks are just having a disagreement at work or at the gym about their bill, like you can see how history of trauma can play into this. I'm deeply committed to passing on a legacy of healing for ourselves, for our communities. Our relationship with the earth folds into that. We're not going to talk a ton about that today, but the more you understand trauma, the more you see how it's just showing up everywhere in our relationships. And I really hope and want and desire to create a safer, more joyful life for you, for myself, for my family, this beautiful little babe of mine. She's 16 months old. And for all the people she's connected with, all the people in future generations, I'm really hoping we can get on a healing track and continue in that direction. So my background, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I'm an experienced registered yoga teacher, a certified yoga therapist, and a continuing education provider. I started the Center for Yoga and Trauma Recovery in 2017. I've written 3 books on yoga and trauma recovery. I just finished in 2023 being president of the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. It's a 3-year term completed in 2023. And I've studied this stuff at Harvard and UCLA. So big universities, international groups. I've really chewed on these ideas and thought about them a lot and put them into practice in my private practice. Also taught yoga for over 20 years, seen all kinds of different students in prisons and recovery centers and schools and in studios. And so wherever you're coming from, I want you to know that we can bring these tools into different places and we can make it work. And a lot of this stuff think we're getting to know in a more mainstream way is backed by neuroscience and hard biology. And the more we land those things, the clearer we can communicate the healing power of different tools, and the better we can meet people with the right options at the right time. All right, so I've created a ton of resources for you. Some of you are here because you've listened to the How We Can Heal podcast. You've read one of my books, Embodied Healing, How You Can Heal, Yoga for Trauma Recovery, right? I've created programs and trainings along these lines. Some of you have been through them, so shout out to you if you've been through it and you're here for more. It's always great to keep learning. So now I'd love to hear from you. It looks like the chat's, it looks like the chat's disabled. I've been trying to fix this for a while, so apologies for my technological limitations, but the Q&A box should work. Yeah, go ahead and pop it. I have the wrong thing open. Pop it in the Q&A box and let me know who you are, where you're coming from, and if you fit any of these. Maybe you know someone struggling with PTSD. Maybe you have been through trauma yourself. Maybe you're holding space for others, right? As a yoga teacher, a mental health professional, health professional. And I get a sense that a lot of folks in this work care a lot, but struggle with burnout. And I think depending on where you are in the world, depending on the systems or the cultures you're a part of, it can sometimes feel like you're going against the norm or against the grain, or there's always another challenge, right? We just had another hurricane here in the US. There's always another trauma and another challenge to move through. And sometimes that can start to feel heavy. So yes, I'm seeing, okay, LCSW in Oregon. Awesome. Welcome. Psychologist in California. Love it. Psychiatrist in New York. Sweet. So happy you're here. Yep. Been through trauma. Yep. Been through trauma. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Have a brother who's a veteran. Okay. Yes. And if they have struggled with PTSD, you didn't say if they have, but if they have, I hope they're getting some yoga. I hope they're getting some support. Yeah, have dealt with vicarious trauma. Okay. So I think, share if you're like, I'm totally different on all these things. Maybe you're a computer programmer and like my brother, everyone in your family is a therapist, including your partner. I'm happy to just know who you are and what brings you here. And as we go through, you're welcome to just pop questions in the Q&A box, okay? So here's what we're gonna cover today. I'm gonna go over just the basics because we've got about 45 minutes today of the impact and the cost of trauma, right? How it impacts us individually, collectively. Also wanna talk about why working with bodies, our bodies, is so essential. I want to share some ways that yoga can help, also some things to watch out for. So some of you might be newer, you might be really curious personally about yoga as a method of trauma recovery. You also might be referring folks, right? I work with a lot of mental health professionals, some have yoga training, some don't, who like to refer their clients and patients to yoga classes. So a few big ticket things to look out for if that's the case. I'm going to share an opportunity for deeper study at the end, and I'm going to give away a copy of, where did I put it? It's on the shelf over here, of Yoga for Trauma Recovery, Theory, Philosophy, and Practice. It's my third book. Looks like that with a blue cover. I'm going to give away a copy of that at the end. So if you stay till the end, I'll give away a copy to one lucky winner. All right. So you might already have a sense of the impact of trauma, right? Maybe you've been through it for yourself. Maybe you've seen people in your life. The World Health Organization estimates that 70% of people globally will experience a potentially traumatic event during their life. Now, I used to work in a juvenile hall, and we had a reported 85% of people on paper had said that they had experienced sexual assault. And so we assumed pretty much everyone, right? Because it's really common for these types of things to be underreported. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that isn't impacted by trauma at some level. So my question is less, have you experienced trauma, yes or no, to how have you responded to the trauma you've been exposed to, right? Like I just mentioned, there's environmental challenges, there's natural disasters. These things can be very traumatic, and it depends on how you relate to them and your exposure to them. but it's easy to even just turn on the news and be exposed to violence and loss and death and all these things that can trigger a reaction to trauma. So I think of it more as, how has this impacted you? How have the stressors and the violence in the world, how have they impacted you? And less about, unless I'm in a clinical setting, like, do you clinically have PTSD or not? The more I've learned and the more I see other people learn about trauma, the more they're like, oh, so much that I've already been through could count as that. And I'm less interested in, will we call it that or not? More interested that we address it and that we offer these healing practices for our bodies and communities. And I think that'll make a little more sense as we go. So in a general, broad, foundational sense, something that I think is super important is that we understand the impact of trauma is biopsychosocial. What does that mean? It means it's in our bodies, it's in our minds and psyches, and it shows up in our relationships. Okay, so when I was a graduate student at Harvard, we had a class in trauma, we had a class in biopsychosocial approaches, and these were foundational for everything we were doing, which was researching and practicing risk and resilience. We were trying to assess risk and we were trying to promote resilience, right? So in that context, knowing how trauma impacts the body, knowing about these different layers, help set us up to go into schools and after school programs, and again, prisons and recovery centers, and work with people in a holistic way. Now, the interesting thing is biopsychosocial, that can seem like, oh, it's three things, it's a lot of things. But you'd be hard pressed to find something that isn't impacted by your body, your mind, and your relationships that also exists in your life, right? So your career, how you think and feel about yourself, your health, your life trajectory. We have research and can fully map out now how these things are connected to experiences of trauma. It's not all gloom and doom, right? Because at the same time that there's risk, at the same time that there's trauma, there's also resilience. There's also all these pathways to healing, right? But it's so important that as we look at the impact of trauma, we're looking at least these three layers: body, mind, relationships, biopsychosocial, and we're meeting needs in all of those categories. I'm going to talk more about that as we go. One of the key elements, and again, I'm a mental health professional, I do diagnose people with different mental health challenges, PTSD being one of them. One of the key components of diagnosing someone with post-traumatic stress disorder is changes in nervous system arousal, okay? So what does that mean? I'm not going to go into all the different representations and theories of our nervous system. There's a ton of them. They're really valuable. But to boil it down, our nervous system can go into hyperarousal, where it's like, go, 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 fight, fight, fight. It can go into hypoarousal, where it's shutting down, turning off, playing dead, stuck to the couch. It can go back and forth between the two. We often call all of these, but especially this one, dysregulation, right? Where your nervous system goes hot, goes cold, goes hot, goes cold, and it's hard to find that middle ground where life feels approachable. And it can do both at the same time even, right? Where it's hyper and hypo at the same time. If you think of an experience like if you were in a car and you put your foot on the gas and your foot on the brake at the same time, an experience like that in your nervous system might be flooded with emergency response, which is really adaptive after a trauma, but also flooded with hypoarousal that damps it down. So you're really experiencing both at the same time. I think that's one of the most challenging and complex experiences. If any of you have been through that yourselves, you're probably like, because it's a lot of energy and a lot of not energy almost on top of that. So it can be a lot to unpack and process, but there are ways to do that. So one thing I want to point out here is if the impact of trauma is largely in our nervous system, it's biopsychosocial, and the bio part of that is very much in our nervous system. Our nervous system isn't just our brain. It goes all throughout our body, right? And there's afferent and efferent neurons. So we have messages going up to the brain from the body. We have messages going down to the body from the brain. It's almost like this beautiful lotus flower, you know, my yogis in the room here, where there's this big, beautiful thing on top and these deep roots underneath. If trauma impacts our bodies, if trauma impacts our nervous system, we would be negligent to not address that, right? So I'm a proponent for embodied healing. I believe it's essential. We understand the neuroscience. We understand our nervous system now more than ever, and we understand how the biology of stress and trauma can impact us. So if we know that body impact, we know there's biological, psychological, and social impacts of trauma, we need to really intervene at every level, right? So an intervention that ignores part is really incomplete. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do an intervention that's just on one angle. It just means we need to look at this whole picture and make sure, are we getting the biological support in? Are we getting the psychological support in? Are we getting the social support in? Right? And it's really common to have this false separation of body and mind, or to even believe that like one can completely control the other when they're really not separate, right? And we can find a window in, we can go top down from a thought into a movement, or we can go bottom up. That's just the nerve pathways I talked about before, where we go from body into awareness. Like we can go in multi directions without saying or thinking that our bodies and our minds are completely separate. So in this diagram, you can see the overlapping circles, right? And how important it is to address each level here. While I was at Harvard, I had a practicum at a middle school and a high school in Jamaica Plain, which is an area kind of towards South Boston, not South Boston, but in that vicinity. And we had a young person, I'll call him Dominic, and I was working with him individually. We had this whole beautiful intervention strategy in the schools there. And I was working with him personally, and his family experienced some pretty significant gang violence, right? So his response, to go back to the last slide, right? If I can go back, can I go through each step here? His reaction in that moment was hyper arousal, right? He got really, really activated, and he got really, really aggressive. Okay, this is like a young Black male in a relatively poor area in Boston at the time, and he got really aggressive. Well, that's dangerous for a number of reasons, but it's also super understandable. Like his family had just been attacked, and what does our nervous system do? Fight or flight. Okay, he didn't flee. He had a fight response. Totally normal to understand that. Most of us can empathize. If someone attacks someone we love, we'd probably be pretty upset about it, right? So what did we do? And this is through like a lot of consultation and reflection and advocacy and all this stuff that's happening between all the people who are supporting the kids in the schools, which was a beautiful process to be a part of. I was working with him individually. I was getting supervision. I was talking to my professors about it, all this stuff. But I was also a yogi, right? I was like that person doing a headstand in the library when I needed more blood to my brain. And people were like, maybe I should try that. I was like, you should, if you want to. I invite you to, right? So anyhow, Dominic has this fight response. It's easy to see where that could go really south really quick. And we all, the team supporting, had seen that happen, where someone got attacked, had a fight response, ended up in juvenile hall, even ended up tried as an adult in prison. We really didn't want that for him. Sweet, sweet kid, super good at drawing cartoons, like talented, funny, amazing, wonderful, and angry that his family had been hurt. So since we have this trauma-informed approach, and since we have this biopsychosocial understanding, we go, okay, how do we, here's like at the center, if you look at the center of this Venn diagram, there's health and illness. So there's something a little bit out of whack in terms of he's got this fight response. It's totally understandable, but it's potentially going to cause harm. There's a risk there for him and for his community that he has this fight response. So how do we support him at every level? Biologically, he did some yoga. I taught yoga at that school, and I could get him in like with like arm balances, right? Because those are a little more active, and he'd be like, oh, I could do that. It's like breakdancing. So he did do some yoga to support him biologically. And that was once a week. So given that he was experiencing a lot of activation energy, we decided like, what else can we invite him to that he'll want, that'll meet this activation. So we found out he was interested in basketball. He had played at one point, he had stopped playing. So we talked to the basketball coach. We got him involved back in practice. Eventually he ended up playing, but he started just by going to practice. And he started to move some of that energy. And it was so good because you could see after practice, he was still angry. He was still upset, but it had come down a little bit. He had moved some of that energy. There were times on the court where he would get into conflict. We could pull him aside. The whole team could support him, his coach, other people. We also, so that's the biological side, right? Get him moving. Okay, he's doing yoga. He's moving this activation energy. We also made sure these other two aspects of the circle here were supported. So he had one-on-ones with me once a week, also groups twice a week. I believe it was 2 or 3 times a week. We had groups where peer support, people could go and talk about what's upsetting them. He could talk about what had happened. He didn't actually at first, it took a while, but eventually he would share how he was feeling. Other people would say, I've had that happen too. Here's what I did. Here's how I felt. Here's how I how I wish I didn't respond. Here's how I wish I did respond, things like that. So we had the biological foundation, moving the activation energy, the psychological support, and the social support. Okay, so you can see how that makes so much sense, how that would help someone move forward when they've been through something really traumatic. So we really can't just do this, just like a one-on-one session while you're sitting down once a week is going to resolve this natural anger you feel in your body or this impact from whatever trauma you've been through. We can't separate that in our approach, but what does happen for a lot of people when trauma becomes, I was going to say unimaginable, when trauma becomes unmanageable, maybe, when we don't quite have the capacity to reach for the coping skills that'll get us through these really intense feelings and reactions that are natural, we can separate attention. We can separate experience and attention. And that's really the basis of dissociation, of this distancing or disconnect that often goes with hypoarousal, but can also be really complicated. So we're not going to get into all the complexities of that today, but I want to make sure we name it, that while body and mind can't be separated, attention and experience can be separated within our brain. And we can create containment to help us try to manage things that don't feel manageable. This is really natural and adaptive. And often people do this in circumstances where they need to attach to a caregiver that's dangerous, or they're even managing at a conscious level. If I know this, it's gonna blow up this whole area of my life. So there's a dance between consciousness and unconsciousness. There's a way that our brains can separate experience and attention, but we still have this whole body mind connected experience and being that holds that truth, right? That truth doesn't go away, even if we dissociate, even if we separate, even if the attention is somewhere else. So yoga, I'm starting to talk about yoga, can help us face difficult emotions for so many reasons. It can provide a quiet, supported space. It can invite us to slowly, over time, connect with our body, mind, and breath. That can be very strategic, especially when we're talking about dissociation. I'm not recommending that if you know someone or that you find yourself dissociating to just sit down and meditate and get inside and that'll resolve everything instantaneously. No, there's a lot of skill, a lot of pacing, a lot of resourcing that goes with that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Yoga and somatic practices. I was talking about basketball earlier, right? Sometimes it's Tai Chi or hiking outdoors. There's a lot of different angles on being embodied. Yoga is not the only way. It's one that I personally love. But these practices can help us strengthen our relationship to our inner knowledge, our inner guidance and direction system, and to our emotions. And I think if the space is held well, yoga can help us to feel what we feel, know what we know, move through things that are really sticky or difficult, and get to the other side of that. Move from feeling unsafe to feeling some sense of safety. Move from feeling anger and hyper aroused to some sense of grounded and calm. I've seen this transition in a single class. I've seen this transition in a year of 6 classes a week in juvenile hall. I've seen this transition over the course of a decade. So it's not always going to happen right away, but a lot of folks report as they go through yoga, they can start to feel and even express more what they're feeling. So how can yoga help? If the impact of trauma is biopsychosocial, if the impact of trauma is in our nervous system, what can yoga do to help with that? The first and most important thing I want to share with you, and if this is the only thing you take away from today's training, like put stars around it, write it down in your notebook, take a screenshot of this slide, whatever. Resourcing. Okay, so some of you have heard about this, some of you practice this a lot. In the face of unknowable trauma, in the face of overwhelming stressful experiences, we don't need to just dive into all the feelings of that right away. We need to build some solid ground first, right? So even in a town, thinking of Asheville right now, even in a town that's inundated in water, you can't just rebuild from that, right? You have to first shut off the electricity and find solid ground somewhere away where you can survey the damage and then come in as it's appropriate, right? We've got to start by resourcing ourselves, finding community, finding food, finding water in these natural disasters. And in the experience of violent psychological trauma, finding center, finding ground, finding support, right? So what can that look like in yoga? We can do an entire yoga practice, and this fits with yoga philosophy, around the theme of peace, peacefulness, inviting a sense of peace. That might seem far-fetched if you're not feeling peaceful inside. So there's plenty of other resources we can use. We can go for centering, collecting energy in, collecting attention in, shutting down all the tabs of our mind. We can go for grounding, connecting with the earth. One of my favorite quotes, I saw this in an airport on one of those little square inspirational cards. And it was a quote, oh, I wish I could remember who, but it was, it's important to remember that you're not Atlas carrying the world, that the world is actually carrying you. So grounding, knowing that, as one of the guests on my podcast said this season, I'm a meat suit flying through space. Like there's so much magic and so much beyond my control and so much I don't understand, but somehow I'm supported here. I'm getting oxygen. I'm getting, enough food and water. Going back to those basics, going back to the ground, going back to us as a part of a whole. So yoga can do this intentionally. It can also, through the breathing practices, through the movement practices, move us in a direction that feels more resourced. So sometimes we're really intentional about this, and I think that's great. But I've been to classes with teachers who aren't really trained in trauma. They're generally like good-hearted humanitarian people, and they're just focusing on breath and movement and inviting folks to be with their bodies and inviting folks in a way that works for them. And you feel and see when you walk out of the room that, things are a little more manageable and people are in a little bit of a different place. So using yoga practices to resource, number one, right? Using yoga and somatic practices to process, number two. And this fits with like Judith Herman's approach to trauma and recovery, right? Book Trauma and Recovery, where we always focus on stabilization first. Then we go into like, how do we unpack this really gnarly experience that someone's been through? So the processing piece, often I've seen in yoga and somatic practices, kind of comes up in waves. Sometimes a really big chunk comes, sometimes a tiny little awareness, but often this is like the crying in Shavasana. Like raise your hand if you've been there and done that. That's what got me into yoga, really. Like I just tried this class my first year at UCLA. I was like, oh, I'm gonna try something new. Was in Shavasana, started crying because like I had been through a breakup and I was like, I thought I was feeling my feelings, but like, whoa, there they are. I didn't realize I was so busy with school that I didn't have space for the grief. But here I am in Shavasana and there it is. It just found space. I created space through my practice. So yoga can invite some of that processing to happen just through the nature of paying attention to the present moment, paying attention to our bodies, right? I mentioned earlier, we can separate attention and experience. And yoga starts to bring attention and experience back together. It can be profoundly healing if we want to make sure we're not diving in the deep end of that. So for me, as a freshman in college, feeling my feelings around the grief of the breakup I had been through actually felt really good. I was like, went back to my roommate, my BFF at the time. I was like, I don't think I'm really like processing this emotionally. And she was like, you're not really talking about it that much. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really talking about it, right? It's like just moving on with all the other newness of freshman year of college. So yoga can help us address, move through, process difficult emotions and truths in ourselves and our lives. It can also offer a sense of relief. And what do I mean by that? When we feel a feeling that's been lingering there, even if we're not focused, it's not the front of our attention, like the grief I was just describing wasn't the front of my attention, it's there, right? It's somewhere in there in our bodies, in our awareness, somewhere. Even if we really don't feel super aware of it, it's there. Have you ever had the experience of having a good cry, right? Like if you woke up this morning, you're not like, hey, I really want to cry today. Like most of us aren't like, yeah, that sounds great. I want to have like a big old sobbing, snotty, gnarly cry today. But how do you feel when you finish crying? There's that point eventually where, okay, something just moved. Something went through. I just got the chills, right? Something processed. And it's not hanging out there anymore. It's not tucked away in my neck or my shoulders or my hands or my somewhere in my brain, like taking attention to, it takes energy to not pay attention to things too. So taking energy. So processing can bring us a sense of relief and even a sense of being more peaceful, more centered, more grounded. Yeah. So there's a circular nature to it. Yoga can bring a sense of healthy community. Often people practice together. One of my favorite classes from when I was back in Los Angeles is available online. I still do it to this day just because I love that teacher. I love the way he speaks. He's really frank. He's really funny. I see people in the Zoom room that I knew in Santa Monica 20 years ago. It's pretty cool. And I can still feel that sense of community even online. We can also be in shared space together. And even without talking, right? Bio, psycho, social. There's this social element of knowing we're not alone, of just knowing, hey, like these practices are challenging, but we're all showing up and we're supporting each other. So yoga can help us resource. It can help address what's happening in our nervous system, right? Like if we're hypo or hyper, we can come out a little more balanced. And it can help us process those emotions, the psychology of it. And it can also help us build community. Okay. So a few things to watch out for. Good. We're good on time. If you are feeling called to a yoga practice, if you're referring other folks to a yoga practice, yogis and the yoga culture is a work in progress, a work in process. And we can end up in classes where there's an excessive emphasis on contortion, like, oh, if you just keep going, you'll get your leg behind your head. Not appropriate for all bodies, definitely not all moments in life. There are some teaching styles that are very domineering, that are very hierarchical, where if you're not doing what the teacher says in the room, you feel like you're a rebel, right? Like to walk out of the room is not an option. Like you're locked in, even like these things happen. And really that starts to go in the direction, if it isn't already, of cult dynamics or even exploitation of students. So we want to be able to sniff this out. If we're in a room where there's a teacher who's domineering, if we're in a room where the teacher is pushing us into a shape with their words or their hands, when we start to feel a little like, oh, I don't know, something's thinking about this, I can't put my finger on it, can't quite name it, we're going to step out. We're going to find a healthier environment because we're looking for a healthy social environment to recover. I say this because just like many systems in the world, the yoga world has been reckoning with trauma, with some of these dynamics that get out of rye, with teachers who step out of line. And I think it's really healthy that we reckon with that. And I think it's really healthy that we name it because there's so many amazing, kind, humanitarian, good people who make mistakes in a good place. Like there's so many like good enough teachers, if you will, good enough cultures that we can heal in. And as long as we have the awareness of these challenges, it can really just help us to really evolve the culture of yoga too. So same thing, this is a little bit lighter version of it, but trying to make the same practice work for everyone or trying to make the same practice work for one body across a lifespan. I just had a baby over a year ago. My practice looked very different while I was pregnant, appropriately so. My practice looked very different postpartum, my practice looks different today than last week, and that's okay, right? I'm not trying to cookie cutter do the same thing every day. Early in my yoga career, this was very popular. You have a sequence, you do it every morning, you repeat, repeat, repeat. And I do believe that the repetition element is great for learning. Repetition is great for building strength in practice. So is variety. But we can't force like a cookie cutter and think it's going to help. And we actually can, this can harm us psychologically when we're like, oh, I'm supposed to be able to do this. Like, no, maybe you don't need to do deep twists when you're pregnant. Actually, probably like any prenatal yoga teacher will tell you, don't do deep twists while you're pregnant, right? There's a baby in there, give them space. Okay. So basically, what am I saying here? Watch out for any practice that isn't trauma informed, that isn't aware of healthy social dynamics, healthy biology, healthy psychology. So it's super important that as we offer embodied practices, we're doing it in a trauma-informed way. We're aware of this biological, psychological, social layer, and we're inviting and addressing all of the above, or at least making sure, you know, someone's getting some of the other support somewhere else. So maybe you have like a yoga practice in a community where people are getting movement and getting community support, but someone goes to therapy once a week somewhere else. All good, right? It doesn't all have to happen in the same space. So we're all a work in progress. The yoga community itself and culture is also developing and growing. And the more we as referrers, as consumers can be aware of trauma, can be aware of unhealthy social dynamics, the better. Okay. Woohoo! All right, we're coming around. We covered the impact of trauma, the cost of it, the impact on our nervous system, what it does to our bodies, our brains, potentially our social relationships. It can even impact our career, right? All of those things. We covered the basics there. I think I made a pretty good case for why working with our bodies is essential. Yeah? Yeah, okay, good. We've just got to do it at some capacity. And I'm a big proponent of yoga. You might love Tai Chi, by all means, right? You might use basketball and walks in the park and stretching, great. But including all of our nervous system, including our whole body and being is so essential. Talked about some ways that yoga can help and some things to watch out for. We could get more specific and granular with this, but this is the general foundation. Now, if you will, I'm going to share with you an opportunity to study this a little deeper. Often I get questions around, okay, you walk me through some resourcing practices? What does it look like to somatically resource after this manifestation of trauma or that manifestation of trauma? So, I mean, I've spent a lifetime just nerding out about this stuff. I'm happy to go there with you. We've just got about 5 more minutes for today, but I'll share with you some other opportunities, and then I'm going to give away a copy of Yoga for Trauma Recovery. Okay, so if you're someone who is teaching, leading, you're a wellness professional, or you're like a pro healer, you're someone who's just like into the healing arts, wants to understand yourself, wants to understand your community, and you're really wanting to learn all of the details of this, I do have an 8-week certification program that I created in 2015. It was the very first trauma-informed yoga online certification. So yes, back in the day, it was the only one online, any search engine. It's an 8-week training and certification program. We do have one more cohort this year that starts next Monday, October 7th. So what does the program look like? What's in it? So we start with foundations of health, right? Remember that middle of the biopsychosocial diagram? There's health and there's illness. We want to start with advocating for health. We also want to thoroughly understand trauma. So we go through what is PTSD, what is complex trauma, what is attachment trauma, all these different ways that trauma can impact ourselves, our lives, our clients, the people we love, serve, and support. In week 3, I talk all about the nervous system and somatic psychotherapy. So what do we know about our nervous system? What are some of those key models to understand not only how trauma impacts us, but how we backtrack that impact, how we heal that impact, how we resolve that impact in the nervous system. From there, in week 4, we go into the fundamentals of yoga philosophy and yoga practice. So I mentioned earlier, ahimsa, peacefulness, nonviolence is a core tenet of yoga philosophy. We talk about that in the program in much more depth. We talk about all the different philosophical pillars and pieces we can bring to a practice in a way that's trauma-informed. And in week 5, explicitly, we go through principles of trauma-informed yoga, right? What does it look like when a class, an individual session, a group experience is trauma-informed, and how can we consciously cultivate that? Week 6, I get into advanced principles like dissociation, like shame, ways that that can show up, ways we can understand it, ways we can address it in groups and in individual work. Week 7, I cover a research review. So we have a lot of research in yoga and trauma at this point in the world, at this point in time. So it's important to be aware of it and to be able to refer other folks to it. Week 8, so when this program first started, it was 6 weeks, right? And then we had people do a little research at the end. And then people would be like, oh, what, like, I'm so excited and I'm so full of energy, but I'm so scared to take the next step. So when I lengthened the program in 2017 to 8 weeks, we added the full research review week and we added the practicum week so that you have within the program the opportunity to take that next step. Maybe you're a therapist and you're wanting to do more movement with your clients. Well, you could try that. You could try that with your partner or someone your roommate or your kid at home and just give it a try so you can move through the awkwardness of it. You can host a class, like a free class, if you're a yoga teacher and you want to try on some of these trauma-informed cues without having so much pressure. So the practicum is short, it's specific, and it's not meant to get you through to the other side of like, okay, thanks for all this wonderful experience and information, but like, how do I communicate that to other people, right? I was a fitness instructor at UCLA too, and I remember my first warm-up, I was just like off the beat, even though I danced most of my life, and I was like, arm, hamstring, leg, all right, good job, you're warm. Like, I just didn't have it within me organized in a way that I could deliver it. So the practicum is the place to be awkward, to get some of that nervousness or energy out, and to, show yourself that you can do this, and to show yourself to learn how you want to do it, and to get some feedback too, if you want. So who is this program for? It's designed for yogis, counselors, therapists, teachers, wellness providers. We've had Reiki practitioners, massage, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurse practitioners, healing professionals, and also pro healers, like people who are just like, my healing is my profession. I want to learn everything I can about it. I want to take notes on myself. I want to bring this to my therapist. Absolutely. So you don't have to have some pre-certification to get into our program, right? But if you're going to offer therapy, you need to be a licensed therapist. If you're going to teach yoga, you need a 200-hour teacher training, right? This isn't a 200-hour teacher training where we talk about the energy lines in Warrior 2 or the foot placement in Warrior 1, right? So all of that is separate. What you do with it, you can integrate it into your life in the way that is best for you. And that's part of what the practicum is for too, finding that next step, finding that integration. This next cohort is unique because we do have 4 live calls with me. We don't always have this. Heads up, we sometimes get a little silly. But these are usually relatively small group calls where you can ask questions, you can meet other people, they're pretty laid back. We can chew on some of these harder concepts or talk about how it applies to things that are happening right now in the world. We have 4 of these scheduled. The first one is a welcome call next Monday at noon Pacific. We're going to keep all of them at noon Pacific. We will offer an alternative time if we have a lot of folks from a different area of the world. Sometimes I see these patterns, right? All of a sudden, all these people in Texas enroll, or a whole bunch of people in the Philippines once, right? So if we have a significant group in another time zone that doesn't work with you, we will offer a second. There is an application to enroll, right? So you go to the website, howwecanheal.com, click the Apply Now button. It'll send you to the application. Should only take about 5 minutes. You don't have to put your whole life story, just answer the questions. First thing that comes to mind, things that are true to you, share that with us and we'll let you know if the program is a good fit. Okay. You can learn more at howwecanheal.com/Y4T. You can also just go straight to howwecanheal.com, navigate from the menu into the different training options. All right. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me share and for your curiosity in this work. So I am going to give away a copy of Yoga for Trauma Recovery, which is the book on the right. And I'm going to give you a second to just put your name into the chat. I have a magic number in my mind, and I'm going to count that after I give you a moment. And I'll just share with you while you're writing in the chat. Embodied healing. I wrote in 2015. That's a great general overview. If this is like super new to you, I think you can still get it on Amazon. I don't have any physical copies here. If you're someone just looking for your personal healing, how you can heal is all resources, okay? And yoga for trauma recovery, that one's like, I wanted it to be able to be in a college level course, okay? So if you are super passionate about this, want to get trained in it, this is actually the book we use in the course as well, right? So we slowly throughout the course of the 8 weeks read all of Yoga for Trauma Recovery. It's a little more dense, but it's also meant to be legible, right? So anyone who picks it up can read the stories, can read the information, can take it home, can apply it. There's reflection questions in there for your own learning and depth as well. Okay, let me get in. Hold on. I might have to end my screen share. There we go. No, I don't have to. Okay. All right. So I'm going to count. Last chance to put your name in the chat. Diane Richards, it's great to see you here. Oh, all right, Diane, go ahead and put your email address in the Q&A box, and we'll email you, get your address, and we'll ship out your book, okay? So congratulations. And for the rest of you, I'm always bummed when I don't win. So for the rest of you, I'm going to send a PDF copy of How You Can Heal, the yellow book in the middle. So you'll get that in your inbox today or tomorrow at the latest. So keep an eye out for that. Okay. Okay. Any last questions? I'm going to go back to the Q&A and see. I'll scroll and see if there's anything unanswered. Can I go through the program for myself? Yeah, I answered that, right? Yes. That is a yes. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for caring about healing and about trauma recovery for yourself and for those people in your world. I really appreciate you just taking the time in your life to learn a little bit. I hope you learned something valuable here today. And again, like I said, it might just be resourcing. And if you're having a rough day today, I'm telling you, resourcing. The other day, my daughter was up from 1 to 5 in the middle of the night. I'm not even joking. She was up from 1 to 5. I was so tired. I had work to do for my podcast. And that's like when Alex will take the dog and the babies out for a walk, right? So he was like, okay, text me when you're done. So he left and I hopped straight in the bath. Like, I was like, there is no way I'm giving anything to anyone until I take care of myself for a minute. So it all worked out. I got my work done after. But, you know, I'm a very delayed gratification person by training. And I was just like, this is one of those moments where I need to feed myself first. So I encourage you to resource, to take care of yourself, give yourself what you need, whatever that might be. And find the simplest thing. Start with your body, start with water, start with some deep breaths or some yoga. Find what serves you today. And keep up the wonderful, beautiful work of loving and leading. All right, so thank you so much. If you have follow-up questions, send them to lisa@howwecanheal.com. And that is it. And we're done for today. Only went 4 minutes over. Yay! Thanks so much for being here, and we'll send you the recording shortly. You're welcome. You're welcome. Awesome. Yes, thank you for being here. Have a beautiful day all across the US, all of Canada, and the world. Shout out to each of you. Lots of love. Bye.